The kettle slipped. Genevieve Marley felt it go before she heard it. That small, bright shift of weight in the silver pot when her thumb brushed the loose hinge. And in the half-breath it took her to understand, the tea was already arcing toward the Duke of Ravensmere's lap. Hot Darjeeling, steeping 8 minutes, enough to scald a footman through livery, and the Duke wore only his morning shirt and a thin lawn dressing robe over braced legs that the entire household swore had not moved since the carriage went over the Brentham Bridge 14 months ago. She had time for one thought, and the thought was not for him. Stand up. He stood. The chair scraped back so violently that it tipped onto 2 legs and clattered against the breakfast sideboard. The Duke's hand caught the edge of the table, not the way an invalid catches a thing, all wrist and forearm tremor, but the clean, decisive grip of a man who had simply chosen to push to his feet. His weight was on both legs. His shoulders, broad enough to fill the doorway he had not crossed in over a year, squared as if for a parade ground. Tea ran down his thigh and pattered onto the rug. He did not look at the tea. He looked at her. His eyes were very dark grey, and they were terrible. For a single suspended second, the morning room of Ravensmere Court held its breath. The April sun came through the south casement in long, golden bands. Daffodils nodded in the porcelain bowl on the sideboard. Behind the Duke, the long case clock ticked once, twice, and from the doorway came the small, fatal sound of a silver salver kissing the marble. Mr. Halsey, the second footman, had dropped the toast. The Duke did not turn his head. He spoke, and his voice was the voice of a man who had once commanded the 20th Light Dragoons at Quatre Bras. Quiet, exact, the kind of quiet that travels. Lock the doors. For half a beat, no one moved. Halsey. Still he had not turned. Still his eyes were on her. Both doors, the garden door and the corridor door. Now, and the key into my hand. Genevieve lowered the kettle, slowly, as if the act of setting it on the tray could be argued backward, undone, returned to the moment 1 minute ago, when she had merely been the new chambermaid, pouring breakfast tea for an invalid master. Her fingers did not shake. They had not shaken at her father's deathbed, and they had not shaken at the surgical mate's cot below decks at Cape Trafalgar when she was 9 years old, and they did not shake now. She had known, of course. That was the unbearable part. She had known he could stand for at least 11 days. She had simply not known he would stand for tea. Mr. Halsey made small, terrified noises, but he was an English footman in an English house, and a Haworth Duke had given him an order, and his hands moved before his terror caught up. The corridor door turned in its lock with a soft, rich click. The garden door followed, a heavier sound, oak against oak. He brought the key forward on the salver and laid it in the Duke's palm. The Duke closed his hand on it without taking his eyes off her. Out, Halsey. Your Grace. Through the kitchen passage, to Pell. Tell Pell I am taking my breakfast in here this morning, and the new girl is taking it with me. Repeat the message. Halsey repeated the message, voice cracking on the word girl. Word for word, Halsey. To Pell, in his own hand. No one else. If anyone else asks, you have not been in this room. Go. Halsey went. The Duke and Genevieve looked at each other across the small wreckage of breakfast. He was 28 years old. He stood 3 inches over 6 feet, and the morning shirt clung where the tea had soaked through, showing the long ridge of muscle along his thigh that was not the thigh of a man who had spent 14 months in a bath chair. His hair, the deep brown of wet bark, was still in some disorder from sleep. There was a thin, pale scar through one eyebrow. Quatre Bras again, she remembered. And below that, the eyes that had decided very calmly, just now, to keep her in this room until he understood what she was. Sit down, he said. She sat. He moved toward her, and she watched him move, because watching was what she had been trained for, and what she had been sent here to do. There was a stiffness in his right knee. Old, mostly mastered. He compensated through the hip. The gait, by the time he reached the second chair at the table, was the gait of a man pretending nothing was wrong, which is to say, it was nearly perfect. Only someone watching for it could see. She had been watching for it. He sat across from her. He set the key on the table between them, very precisely, with the bow toward her hand. Then he poured himself a fresh cup of tea from her tray with his own hand, and his hand was perfectly steady. "You will tell me," he said, "in the order I ask, how long you have known, who sent you, and what you intend to do with what you have just seen." His voice had gone very quiet. "Lie to me," he added, "and I will know." Genevieve set her hands flat on the table on either side of her plate. She thought, with a kind of dry interior amusement that surprised her, that she had practiced this conversation in her head perhaps 200 times, and not once had she rehearsed it after spilling boiling tea on his trousers. 11 days, she said. His mouth moved. Almost a smile, almost not. Specific. You walked the length of the long gallery at 4 in the morning 11 nights ago, from the bust of the 7th Duke to the window above the Rose Terrace. There is a board near the window that gives, even when one steps lightly. I heard it from the linen room. What were you doing in the linen room at 4 in the morning? Counting sheets. Try again. Listening for you. He did not blink. Why? Because the 6th night I had been here, I went to lift you from the chair to the bed at the housekeeper's instruction, and you took your own weight off the chair before my hands reached you. It was a small thing. The kind of small thing a person does when they have forgotten that they are not supposed to. After that, I listened. The Duke watched her. My father, he said slowly, is going to want to know who taught you to listen like that. Your father is buried at Wexham St. Mary's, Your Grace. He was lost 9 years ago to a malignancy of the stomach. You sat with him on the last night, and would not let your sister into the room because she was carrying. So whoever wants to know, it isn't your father. There was a silence. It was a very particular kind of silence, the kind that occurs when a man who has been preparing to be lied to has been told, instead, several true things he did not expect. Your name, he said, is not Genevieve Marley. It is. Marley of where? Plymouth. My father was Surgeon Edward Marley of His Majesty's frigate Audacious. He took your shoulder ball out at Cape Trafalgar when you were a midshipman of 14. You fainted twice and bit through the leather strap. You wrote to him every Christmas until the year we lost him. The Duke's hand, which had been raising the teacup, paused, set the cup down, untouched. Edward Marley's daughter, he said, is a child. I was 9 when he wrote me your last letter as a New Year gift. I am 26 now, Your Grace. Children grow. Edward Marley's daughter, he said, in the same quiet, is in Plymouth, where she keeps a school for the orphans of the Channel Fleet. She is here. The school keeps itself for 2 months in spring. Why? Because Captain Sir Hugh Greville wrote to her in February and said that the man whose shoulder her father had set was being slowly poisoned in his own house, and would she go and see for herself before he sent a Bow Street man and frightened the man behind it into changing his methods. She went. The Duke was perfectly still. The clock ticked. A drift of cherry blossom petal blew past the casement and lodged in the corner of the leaded pane. Slowly poisoned, he said. By whom, I am not yet certain. By what, almost certain. It is in the night tonic Pell measures out for you under your cousin's recipe. I have tasted it. It contains foxglove leaf in a quantity that no English physician would prescribe to a man who has been told his heart is weak, and it contains something else I do not yet know. A bitterness. Probably an alkaloid. I shall have a name for it within a week. My cousin, he said. Lord Tristan Holworth. Yes. You have been in my house, said the Duke, For 6 weeks, pretending to be a chambermaid, listening at the linen room door, tasting my medicine, watching me walk the gallery at 4 in the morning. Yes. And this morning, he said, you spilled boiling tea on my legs. She inclined her head. I needed to know whether you were the man Captain Greville said you were. A man who could rise from a chair on instinct after 14 months of pretending he could not, and who had the nerve to choose a hot kettle over a hatpin in his own butler's hand. You could have used a hatpin in his hand. It would have been less convincing. He looked at her for a long time. Then he laughed once. A short, surprised, entirely human sound. The kind of laugh that escapes a man before he has decided whether to laugh. And Genevieve felt some small, foolish part of herself, which had spent 6 weeks beneath a starched cap, pretending to flinch at male voices, settle warmly somewhere beneath her ribs. She did not show it. Drink your tea, Miss Marley, he said. He pushed the second cup, the one she had poured for him, gently across the table. It is, against expectation, very good tea. And tell me everything Greville told you, from the beginning, slowly. We may have the morning. We may not. She drank her tea. She told him. By the time the long case clock struck 9, she had told him this, that his old commanding officer, Captain Sir Hugh Greville, late of the 20th Light Dragoons, and now of a small estate near Salisbury, had received in February a letter from a Ravensmere groom who had been pensioned off in January, and who had had a good deal too much at the local fair, and said certain things to a horse-coper who had been at Quatre Bras under Greville's command. Things about young Lord Tristan visiting the apothecary at Biddeford in person, in a manner unbecoming a gentleman. Things about a particular brown glass bottle which the apothecary made up to a recipe his lordship had brought himself. Things about Lord Tristan's manner being very pleasant indeed at his cousin's bedside, and very different in the saddling yard. That Greville had called his solicitor and had drawn up 2 papers. The first was a letter to the Lord Chancellor, naming his suspicions, to be opened only on news of the Duke's death. The second was a letter to Edward Marley's daughter, asking her, as the only person on earth he trusted, who possessed both medical knowledge and the kind of nerves that could pretend at curtsies for 6 weeks, whether she would do this for him. That Greville had said, in his letter, only one personal thing, and only at the very end. He had said, "He is a good man, my dear. The boy who came back from Quatre Bras was not the boy who went to Quatre Bras, but the man inside him is the same. If he dies in his bed under this nephew's hand, I will not survive the news. Go." That she had not been able to refuse. The Duke listened to all of this without interruption. When she had finished, he sat for a long moment, looking at his own hand on the table, the broad palm and the long surgeon-set fingers. And at length he turned the hand over and looked at the inside of his wrist, as if checking for something there. Then he said, quietly, "The night tonic. How long?" 5 months at least, by Pell's count. He measures it himself, on Lord Tristan's recipe, every evening. He does not know. He does not know. No. Lord Tristan asks him personally each visit. Mr. Pell would die before he failed to measure a tonic correctly, Your Grace. He would also die before he believed your cousin had asked him to harm you. Yes. A pause. Pell would. He was silent for a time. Genevieve watched him think. It was an interesting thing to watch. There was no melodrama in it, no fist closing into the table, no flush of rage. Only the inward, steady reorientation of a man rebuilding a map of his own house, his own tenants, his own bedchamber, around the fact that someone he had known since boyhood had been killing him slowly for the better part of half a year. The grief was there. He absorbed it without performing it. "Why?" he said at last. "Did I stand? For the tea?" "For the tea. Because some part of you is tired of pretending. Because boiling water on a lame man's lap is one of those small accidents that lame men cannot afford. and you have stood up from a chair so many times since January that the body did not consult you. Since January. At least since January, Your Grace. Probably December. It is impossible to fake a 14-month convalescence without practicing. The nights I heard you walk, you were walking like a man who had been walking for several weeks. He nodded slowly. Why have I been pretending? That, Your Grace, I do not yet know. It is, in fact, one of the 2 questions I came here with. And the other? Whether you knew you were being poisoned. I did not. Then I am relieved, Your Grace, because the other question had become very awkward. He looked at her. There was something at the corner of his mouth. Not yet a smile, but the place where a smile begins. Miss Marley. Your Grace? Why are you not afraid of me? She considered the question seriously. It deserved consideration. Because the Duke who was going to be afraid of, she said, would not have asked a footman to lock the doors. He would have asked him to bring a magistrate. Locking the doors is the act of a man who needs to think before he is observed. Magistrates are the act of a man who is already at the end of his thinking. You are not at the end of your thinking, Your Grace. You are very near the beginning of it. He did not answer that. He rose, not quickly this time, but with a deliberation that was almost ceremonial. He went to the bell pull, stopped, did not ring. He turned back to her. Pell, he said, must continue to measure my tonic. I must continue to take it. And I must continue, in front of every soul in this house except you, Pell, and Halsey, to be a man who cannot stand. Can you do this with me? For how long, Your Grace? Until I know what my cousin wants. You do not know. I do not know. I have suspicions. I do not yet have the shape of it. I have been waiting. A pause. I have, it transpires, been waiting too long. Yes, she said. You have. Then, with your help, Miss Marley, and Pell's, we will find the shape of it together. Will you stay? Yes, Your Grace. Good. He looked at her a moment more, with the same quiet, dark grey attention. Genevieve, he said. An unusual name. My mother was French. My mother, said the Duke, was Welsh, and would have liked her enormously. Drink your tea before it goes cold. She did. The clock struck the quarter hour. Spring sun fell across the wreckage of breakfast. In the corridor beyond the locked door, somewhere in the polite, daylit, lethal house of Ravensmere, Lord Tristan Haworth was at that moment writing his weekly letter to his cousin's apothecary in Bideford, and his hand was as steady as the Duke's. The second time the Duke of Ravensmere stood in front of Genevieve Marley, it was not an accident. It was 11 o'clock that night, in the library, and Pell was holding a candle. The valet was a small, grey-haired man with a face that had worn the same expression of patient disapproval since before young Master Edmund had grown into long trousers, and he held the candle now exactly as he had held it for a quarter of a century, between his thumb and the joint of his first finger, so that the flame did not gutter in the draught from the east window. He did not look at Genevieve. He had not looked at her once since the Duke had brought her into the library and closed the door and turned the key. The Duke stood by the long table. He had his back to them both. Mr. Pell, he said. Your Grace. I'm about to say 2 things, and you will let me say them both before you speak. Yes, Your Grace. The first is that I have been able to walk since the 2nd week of January. The second is that the night tonic which Lord Tristan brings me from Bideford is killing me. The candle did not move. In any other valet, in any other house, there would have been a tremor. With Pell, there was only a long, slow lowering of the eyelids, like a man closing a ledger he had hoped would never be needed. When he opened them again, the disapproval was still in place. It had simply, Genevieve saw, deepened. How long, Your Grace? The walking, since January. The poisoning, 5 months, at least. Miss Marley has the medical knowledge, which I do not. I am told it is foxglove, and an alkaloid we do not yet name. Miss Marley, said Pell, without turning his head, is the new chambermaid. Miss Marley, said the Duke, is Surgeon Edward Marley's daughter, sent to me by Captain Greville. She has been in my house 6 weeks, watching for what neither of us was willing to see. There was a pause. I see, Your Grace, said Pell, in the same tone in which he had once announced that Master Edmund had broken his collarbone falling out of an oak. The Duke turned. The library light, candles only, set the planes of his face in shadow. He was in evening shirt and breeches now. The dressing robe of the morning was gone. He stood as a man stands. When he saw Pell looking at how he stood, his mouth tightened. Not with shame, Genevieve noticed, but with the small wince of a man who hates to surprise a person he loves. I've lied to you for 4 months, Pell. Yes, Your Grace. And to the household for 14. That, Your Grace, was different. You had reason. Tell me. Your Grace, tell me, Pell. I want to hear it from you. Tell me why I lied to my own house for 14 months. The valet's eyes came up at last. They were wet, but they did not waver. Because, he said, the doctor at Brussels told you, in front of Lord Tristan, that you would not walk, Your Grace. And his lordship laughed. He thought, Your Grace, that you did not see him laugh. But he laughed. A small, terrible pause. And after that, Your Grace, you decided that no one in this house was going to know what you could do. You did not say it to me, but I saw. The Duke looked down at his own hands. Yes, he said. You wanted to see, said Pell, what he did when he believed you were not coming back. Yes. He has done it, Your Grace. He has. And you have known, said Pell very softly, for some time. I have suspected. Until this morning I had not been certain. And this morning? This morning I stood up to keep tea off my legs, and Miss Marley told me what was in my own glass. Pell turned then and looked at Genevieve for the first time. His face did not change. He bowed, a small, exact bow. The bow of a man acknowledging an unexpected ally on a battlefield he had not realized was a battlefield. Miss Marley. Mr. Pell. I have, said Pell with great dignity, been measuring out a poison into my master's glass for 5 months. You have been measuring out medicine, said Genevieve, to a recipe a physician's name was attached to. The deception was not yours. It was, however, my hand. Then your hand, she said gently, shall measure the cure. He inclined his head. Just once. It was the closest thing to a vow Genevieve had ever heard a manservant make. The Duke crossed to the table. He set both hands on it, leaned a little, and looked at them. Pell with his candle, Genevieve with her steady palms. We have, between us, a problem. Yes, Your Grace. My cousin will arrive on Friday. He arrives every fortnight on Friday. He will dine with me, and he will look at me kindly, and he will give Pell a fresh bottle for the tonic. He will also, between Friday morning and Sunday luncheon, look at the lawyer's boxes in my study, and at the rent rolls, and at the marriage contract drawn up on me at 23, which still, by an unfortunate clause, makes him my heir presumptive until I marry. He has been doing this every fortnight for 14 months. He is patient. He is also very stupid in one specific way. Which way, Your Grace? Said Pell. He has never asked himself why I am still on my feet. There was a silence. Genevieve saw Pell's mouth tighten. He thinks the dose, said the Duke, is working. He thinks he is killing me by inches, and he is content with the inches. He has not entertained the possibility that I have been quietly throwing 2/3 of the bottle into the rose bed. The roses, Pell. Yes, Your Grace, I had noticed about the roses. You knew. I suspected, Your Grace. I did not draw a conclusion. The roses on the south wall, he added to Genevieve, in a tone of professional grievance, have been most unhealthy this past winter. The gardener's apprentice has been in tears. I shall apologize to the gardener, said the Duke. I doubt, Your Grace, that he will accept. No. The Duke straightened. On Friday, he said, my cousin will arrive. By Friday, I want 3 things. I want to know precisely what is in the tonic. Every component. I want to know who else in this house Lord Tristan owns. And I want a plan that will let him hang himself without ever knowing he is being watched. The first I leave to Miss Marley. The second I leave to you, Pell. The third we do together. Are we agreed? Yes, Your Grace, said Pell. Yes, Your Grace, said Genevieve. Then go to bed, both of you. Pell, burn nothing. Speak to no one. Sleep if you can. Miss Marley, Your Grace, you will continue to be chambermaid in this house until further notice. I am skilled at it, Your Grace. You spilled boiling tea on me before luncheon. That, Your Grace, was a strategic decision. He looked at her over the candle. The corner of his mouth moved. Good night, Miss Marley. Good night, Your Grace. At 3 in the morning, Genevieve was at the small writing table in her box room above the kitchen, by a single tallow candle, copying out a list of every component she had been able to identify in the brown glass bottle. She had 8 names. 2 of them she was certain of. 3 she was probably certain of. 3 were guesses. Foxglove she had identified the first week. The alkaloid she now suspected was not, as she had thought, an extract of nightshade, but something rarer. And that was unsettling. Because rare meant deliberate. And deliberate meant Lord Tristan had not simply asked an apothecary for something for a weak heart and let nature take its course. He had asked for something specific, which meant he had been told what to ask for. Which meant somewhere between Bideford and London, there was a man who knew exactly what he was prescribing, and who knew it for whom. That man, whoever he was a great deal more dangerous than Lord Tristan. She put down her pen and rubbed her eyes. The candle was guttering. She was tired in a way she had not been tired since the worst of her father's last illness, when she had sat up alone with him for 3 nights in a row and read to him from his naval gazettes, because he liked her voice better than her aunt's. She had not, until this morning, allowed herself to like the Duke. It had been a deliberate choice. Captain Greville's letter had been very clear. He is a good man, my dear. He had been Greville's particular favourite. Greville had buried his own son at Talavera, and had never married after, and the half-paternal warmth in his last paragraph had been, to a woman who had read it 3 times by candlelight, and then folded it into the lining of her travelling box, a warning. Liking the patient was the surgeon's mistake. Her father had told her so when she was 11. You can love them, my Genevieve, but you may not like them. Liking is what makes the hand slow. Love only the work. The trouble was that her father, who had been a wise man in many things, had not foreseen the Duke standing up from his chair like a man pretending nothing was wrong. He had not foreseen the small, surprised laugh. He had not foreseen the way the Duke had looked at her when he had said her name. Genevieve. An unusual name. As if he were testing how the syllables sat in his own mouth, and finding that they sat well. She picked up her pen. She set it down again. Outside, the clock at the stable yard struck the hour. A horse blew somewhere. In the quiet behind the sound, much further off, she heard the small, distinct creak of the 11th stair on the long gallery, the stair that was nearest the Duke's bedroom door, and which he passed every night when he came down to walk. She listened. He was not walking tonight. He was waiting to see, she realized, whether she would. She took her boots off, and her stockings, and walked barefoot across her cold floor to the door, and opened it half an inch, and stood very still in the dark, and listened to the silence of a man at the bottom of a staircase, 3 floors below, doing exactly the same thing. After a long moment, she heard him return upstairs. She closed the door. She blew out the candle. For the first time in 6 weeks, she did not lie awake. Lord Tristan Halworth arrived at Ravensmere Court on Friday the 12th of April at 23 minutes past 3, in his own curricle, with 1 groom and a small leather case which he carried himself. Genevieve saw him first from the 3rd-floor landing window. He was 27 years old, and he was beautiful. That was the first and most disconcerting thing about him. He was the kind of beautiful that does not soften a man, the same straight Halworth nose as his cousin, the same long line of jaw. But where the Duke's mouth had a stillness to it, Lord Tristan's was always doing something, smiling, pursing, turning at one corner only as if he had heard a private joke he did not intend to share. He was perhaps half an inch shorter than the Duke and built more lightly, with the kind of slim, elegant strength that suited driving 4 in hand. His hair was the same wet bark brown, but worn longer, raked back from a high, fair forehead. Blue eyes. The Duke's were grey. It was a small, accidental thing that had decided generations of female opinion in the family. The blue Halworths and the grey Halworths. And Genevieve's father had once told her, on the strength of a single dinner with old Lord Ravensmere in 1809, that the blue ones were, generally speaking, a bad lot. She watched Lord Tristan hand the case to no one. He carried it himself up the steps. The groom took the curricle. In the south morning room, Genevieve had been dusting the same Sèvres figurine for a full quarter of an hour. The clock chimed the half-hour, and she heard the front doors open, and then Pell's voice, bright and absolutely calm. "Lord Tristan, His Grace asks if you would be so good as to come up. He is in the small study. The new tonic, His Grace asks, you might bring with you." "Of course, Mr. Pell. How is he?" "Much as last week, my lord." "Eating?" "Indifferently, my lord." "Sleeping?" "Yes, my lord. Until about 4. Poor man. Poor old man." Lord Tristan went up the stairs whistling. He whistled, of all things, Greensleeves. Genevieve set the Sèvres figurine down with infinite care, because if she had not, she would have thrown it. She gave them 10 minutes. Then she lifted her work basket, clean linen for the small study, a perfectly ordinary errand for a chambermaid, and went up the back stairs and along the gallery and tapped on the small study door. "Come." The Duke was in his bath chair, which had been placed in the bay window with a rug across his knees. His face was the particular grey of a man who had been ill for 14 months, which Genevieve, watching, marvelled at. He had taken on the colour like a man pulling on a glove. Pell stood behind him with the tea things. Lord Tristan was in the leather chair opposite, one elegant ankle resting on the other knee, a brown glass bottle on the small table beside him, a smile already in place for whoever might enter. "Linen for the study, Your Grace," said Genevieve, keeping her eyes very low. "Thank you." On the side table. "Lord Tristan?" she bobbed. "My dear." Tristan's blue eyes flicked over her. A casual, automatic appraisal, the kind of glance he gave to anything female that crossed his line of sight. He was already turning back to his cousin before he had finished it, and Genevieve, who had been preparing herself for 48 hours to be looked at by this man, exhaled very slowly through her nose. He did not see her. He did not look at servants. It was the single greatest thing in her favour. She left. Behind the closed door, Lord Tristan said, "Pretty girl, that." "Mrs. Wells's choice. She came up from Plymouth in February. Very steady." "You should be careful, Edmund. Pretty maids in the house of an unmarried duke." "I am, Tristan." "Forgive me. Cruel joke." How are you, truly? Tell me. Through the door, and the door at Ravensmere was an oak door, and this was poor manners on Genevieve's part, but it was also her only means of gathering intelligence. She heard the Duke begin to lie. He lied beautifully. He spoke of an unspecified tightness in his chest that came on toward evening. He said he had taken less of the tonic this week, against doctor's orders, because it made him drowsy. He said he wished he had Tristan's appetite, for he himself could not finish a slice of cold mutton. She heard Lord Tristan say, with what sounded exactly like solicitude, "Take more, Edmund. Dr. Bayton says 1 full measure, morning and night. You are letting yourself slip." "He is a fool. The half measure suits me." "He is a fool I trust, and so should you. Edmund, do not slip on this. For me. I lose my last cousin if you slip on this." She heard the chair scrape as Lord Tristan rose, and the soft sound of a well-bred man crossing a carpet in good boots, and a small, awful pause. "Mr. Pell, the bottle. Show his grace." "Yes, my lord. A full measure tonight, Edmund, in front of me, so that I sleep on the way home." "Tristan, in front of me. I shall worry myself sick otherwise." A pause. Then the Duke's voice, quiet, tired, the perfect voice of a man humoring a beloved relative, saying, "Yes, very well. Pell, pour it." Genevieve, on the other side of the door, closed her eyes. She had 3 seconds to decide what to do. Halfway down the corridor was a window seat with a long velvet cushion. Beneath the cushion was a small panel that gave onto a narrow servants' passage running behind the wall of the small study. She had found it in her second week of dusting and had not, until this moment, mentioned it to anyone. She lifted the cushion, slid back the panel, and was through it and along the passage in 12 seconds. The passage came out at a connecting door beside the study fireplace, which the long curtains hid in any season. She put her eye to the small drilled gap above the latch and looked. Pell was pouring. The brown glass bottle was very nearly full. The measure was the small silver cup that the Duke's grandfather had used for his evening Madeira, and which, she now realized in a cold, clear flash, was almost certainly the reason the dose had been precise enough to weaken him by inches, and not all at once. It was an irregular cup. Pell knew its irregularity by long practice. Lord Tristan, watching, did not. The Duke was in his chair. Lord Tristan was leaning lightly on the arm of his own. Pell brought the cup to the Duke. The Duke raised it, and Genevieve, before she had decided anything, before she had thought anything through, knocked twice. Sharp, twice, low down on the panelled wall behind the curtain. It was the sound of a maid bumping a corridor with her work basket. It was a perfectly ordinary, slightly clumsy, entirely unremarkable sound. Pell's head turned 1/4 of an inch. The Duke, in the same instant, jerked his hand. The cup went over. The contents poured down his shirt front and into his lap. He cursed, a clean soldier's curse. And for one beat, Lord Tristan was not looking at the dose anymore. He was looking at the spreading stain. Edmund. My God. My hand, damn it. Damn it, Tristan, my hand. Pell, fetch a cloth. Yes, my lord. Pour another. Yes, my lord. Pell turned, with great dignity, to the small table, and Genevieve, watching through her drilled gap, saw what no one else in the room could have seen. He poured. He measured. He lifted the cup, and as he carried it back to the Duke, he passed it once, just once, very smoothly, over the open mouth of his own coat pocket. There was the smallest, briefest tip of the cup. A drop fell, perhaps 2. Pell handed the cup to the Duke. The Duke drank it down. Lord Tristan watched him drink. The Duke set the cup on the table. Lord Tristan's smile returned. It was a very fine smile. It had practically nothing wrong with it. Good. Thank you, Edmund. Forgive me. I worry. You are kind. I shall stay to dinner. and tomorrow I will look at the rents, if you can bear me. I can bear you, Tristan. Good lad. Genevieve closed her eyes again. When she had her breath back, she slid the panel closed behind her, replaced the cushion, and walked very steadily down the back stairs to the linen room. There she sat on the corner of an oak chest for a count of 100. Then she rose and went down to the kitchen and asked Mrs. Wells, the housekeeper, whether she might have permission to take a tray of soup up to Mr. Pell's pantry that evening, as she had heard he had been taken with one of his rooms. Mrs. Wells, who had a soft spot for any maid who looked after Pell, said yes. In Pell's pantry at 9:30, with the door bolted and the fire low, Pell removed from his coat pocket a folded handkerchief which had been wrapped, with great care, around something small and damp. He laid it on the deal table. He unfolded it. There was a stain on the linen the colour of weak tea, and at the centre of the stain, a single dark drop, perfectly preserved. 2 drops, Miss Marley. The cup carried 2 drops over the rim when his lordship was looking at his grace. I had hoped for 3. 2 will do, Mr. Pell. What can you do with 2? I can do enough. She wrapped the handkerchief again, slipped it into the lining of her own apron, and left the pantry in the same tread as the kitchen cat, which had been observing the proceedings from beneath a dresser with great professional interest. That night, in the linen room, by candle, with a spirit lamp she had borrowed from the still room, and which she had told Mrs. Wells was for warming linen for her chilblains, she tested the drop with 3 reagents she had brought with her from Plymouth. In a velvet case she had told Customs at Bristol was a sewing kit. The first test gave her foxglove. The second told her there was something else. The third turned a pale, pearl grey green within 40 seconds, and Genevieve sat back on the linen room stool and said quietly to the candle, "Aconite. Dear God." She knew now what was in the bottle. She also knew, with unpleasant certainty, that whoever had taught Lord Tristan Halworth which ingredients to ask for was not, after all, an apothecary at Bideford. Aconite of that purity meant a London chemist with a reputation. It meant payment. It meant correspondence. It meant a paper trail, somewhere, that with the right hand at the right desk could be followed to its end. It also meant something else. Aconite at this purity, mixed with foxglove at this dose, was not the slow attrition Lord Tristan had described to himself. It was a man being kept on a long, slack rein. The rein could be tightened, at his lordship's pleasure, at any moment. 1 increased dose, 1 chosen night, and the Duke of Ravensmere would die in his sleep with no mark on him, and no doctor in the kingdom able to swear to the cause. Lord Tristan was not killing his cousin slowly because he liked the slowness. Lord Tristan was waiting for something, a signal, an event, a date. Whatever it was coming. She blew out the candle and went up to the Duke's small study by way of the servant stair and tapped twice on his door. He had been waiting up. He answered the door himself. He was in shirt sleeves, with the cuffs rolled up on the steady, scarred forearms of a man who had worked at his own land for 14 months without anyone knowing it, and his hair was damp, as though he had been at the basin. There was a glass of brandy on the desk that had not been touched. "Aconite, Your Grace," she said, "and foxglove. The dose is conservative for now. It is, I think, designed to be increased. Your cousin is waiting for an occasion." He let her in. He closed the door. He turned the key. "What sort of occasion?" "I do not yet know. A date, an event. Something that will make your sudden loss convenient." "My birthday is in June." "Yes." "I shall be 29. "Yes." "On my 29th birthday," said the Duke, "the marriage settlement my late father drew on me before his death lapses. After that date, my cousin ceases to be heir presumptive. After that date, the estate descends, in the absence of issue, to the second branch of the family, which is to say, to my mother's brother in Glamorgan, whom I have not seen in 11 years. He cannot afford for you to be alive in June. He cannot afford for me to be alive on the 8th of June. He sat down on the edge of the desk. He looked, Genevieve thought, quite ordinary in that moment. A tall, tired, broad-shouldered man with his hair damp and his cuffs turned back, who had just heard from a chambermaid he had known 48 hours that he was to be quietly removed from the world, on a known date, by a man he had loved. He was 28 years old. She was 26. The clock struck midnight. Miss Marley. Your Grace? What would you do in my place? I would not be in your place, Your Grace. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, I would let him try. There was a long pause. You would let him try. In a controlled environment, Your Grace. Witnessed. With the bottle traced and the apothecary in custody and a Bow Street officer behind the curtain. He's been very careful. Careful men only become incautious when they think they are about to win. I would let him think he was about to win. Then I would close the room around him. That would require, said the Duke slowly, that I marry before my birthday. It would, Your Grace. Why? Because if you marry, his urgency increases. He no longer has until the 8th of June. He has until the wedding. The moment your wife is in the house, he loses his window. Because if you die after marriage, and your widow is with child, the entail holds. He must therefore strike before, which means he must strike on a known evening. Your wedding eve, the night of the betrothal dinner. A celebration where the household is distracted. He will choose the evening himself. He will think he has all the cards. He will not have any of them. The Duke was very still. You would have me marry, he said quietly. To bait him. Yes, Your Grace. That is a cold thing to ask. I am a cold woman, Your Grace. You are not. The clock ticked. She did not answer. You are not a cold woman, Miss Marley, he said again, and he said it without smiling. You are an extremely warm woman who has spent 6 weeks keeping her warmth folded inside a starched cap. And I have noticed it. I noticed it on Tuesday, when you stopped to put your hand on the head of the lurcher in the south corridor. I noticed it on Thursday morning, when Halsey dropped a tureen of soup, and you laughed before you remembered you were a chambermaid. And the laugh was not the laugh of a chambermaid. I noticed it tonight. You are not a cold woman. You are a frightened one, who has decided not to be frightened, which is a different thing entirely. Your Grace. What? You should not say things like that to your chambermaid in your study at midnight. You are not my chambermaid. Tonight I am, Your Grace. Yes, he said, and his mouth moved at the corner. You are. I beg your pardon. There was a silence. Whom would you have me marry? He said. Anyone. Anyone. There must be a young woman of suitable rank in the county, whom your cousin will not suspect of arrangement. A neighbor. A girl who has been at his sister's house parties. A name he himself has at one time mentioned with approval. There is. Then write to her in the morning. By Tuesday, her family will have received your offer. By Wednesday, there will be a notice in the Gazette. By Friday, Lord Tristan will know. And by the eve of the wedding, he will move. And we will be ready. We will be ready, Your Grace. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. The young woman, he said, is Lady Helena Frayne of Hartcombe Park. She is 20 years old. She has danced once with me before the carriage, and once since, at her sister's wedding, where she contrived to push my chair onto the terrace and be very kind to me about it, and where she said 3 things I have remembered. Then write to Lady Helena. I do not love Lady Helena. That, Your Grace, is not pertinent to the present plan. It is pertinent to me. Then it is a problem, Your Grace, for after the 8th of June. Tonight, it is not a problem. You are very practical, Miss Marley. I am my father's daughter, Your Grace. Yes. A pause. Yes, you are. Good night. Good night, Your Grace. She left the study, and she went down the back stairs, and she absolutely did not, allow herself to feel anything until she was inside her own door at the top of the kitchen wing, with the bolt across. Then she sat down on the edge of her narrow bed and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed in and out for a count of 40. She had told a man she had known 48 hours to write a marriage proposal to another woman. It had been the correct advice. It had been the only advice. She lay down in her clothes and stared at the ceiling until the cocks crowed and the sky went grey at the small high window. And at some point she must have slept, because she woke to Mrs. Wells's bell, and her cheeks were dry. Lady Helena Frayne accepted the Duke's offer of marriage by return of post on the following Wednesday morning. It had been a brief, careful, beautifully written letter from the Duke. Genevieve had not, of course, read it, but she had seen the Duke writing it on the Saturday after Lord Tristan's departure, and she had seen the way he laid down his pen between sentences and looked at the rosebed beneath the window. And she had concluded, as she dusted the bookcase across the room, that he had said the necessary things about respect and esteem and shared interest, and had stopped, deliberately, short of saying any of the other things. Lady Helena's reply was brought up by Pell himself on a silver tray. From Hardcombe, Your Grace. Thank you, Pell. The Duke read the letter. He folded it very precisely. He laid it on the desk. He looked for a long moment at his own hand on the desk. Then he said, without looking up, Mrs. Wells. Send for Mrs. Wells, please. Your Grace? And send the new chambermaid to me. Mrs. Wells will know which one. Yes, Your Grace. When Genevieve arrived 10 minutes later, Mrs. Wells was already there. The housekeeper was a stout, kindly woman who had been in service at Ravensmere 31 years and who had brought up 2 generations of Halworth boys with the calm authority of a Yorkshire trooper. She bobbed when Genevieve came in. She looked, Genevieve thought, distinctly puzzled. Mrs. Wells, said the Duke, Marley is to be promoted. She will take over the second-floor rooms from Polly Carter beginning this morning, and she will be one of the 2 chambermaids attending Lady Helena Frayne when her ladyship arrives next month for the betrothal dinner. Polly will move to the linen room. Yes, Your Grace. Also, Marley will dust this study herself, daily, and the small library. No other maid is to enter either room without my permission. Is that understood? Yes, Your Grace. Marley, you understand? Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Wells, would you wait outside for 1 moment? There is a household matter I wish to speak of with Marley. 2 minutes. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Wells went. She closed the door behind her with a small, knowing tilt of her head, the tilt of a woman who had seen many strange decisions made in this house over 31 years, and had never, not once, asked a question about any of them. The Duke and Genevieve looked at each other across the desk. Lady Helena says yes, he said. I am glad, Your Grace. You do not look glad. I look composed, Your Grace, which is what I am paid for. You are paid for being a chambermaid, Miss Marley, and I have just promoted you out of your wages. Then I shall have to be composed for free, Your Grace. He looked at her. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. The first proper smile, she thought, that she had seen from him. Marley, thank you. Your Grace, you have not yet asked what for. For staying. I have not yet stayed. I have not yet finished. You will. He turned the letter on his desk. The wedding is set for the 3rd of June, 5 days before my birthday. Lady Helena prefers a small ceremony, which suits us. She will arrive on the 25th of May with her mother and a single maid. There will be a betrothal dinner on the evening of the 28th. You and I have, by my count, 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Your Grace. My cousin will be at the dinner. Yes, Your Grace. He will look at me, and he will look at Lady Helena, and he will calculate. Yes, Your Grace. And then he will move. Yes, Your Grace. The Duke lifted his teacup. It was empty. I shall require, he said, a great deal of tea. I shall ensure, Your Grace, that none of it spills. He looked at her over the rim of the empty cup. Pity, he said. She left the room before her face could betray her, and she did not let it betray her in the corridor either. But on the back stair, she put her hand against the wall, and she stayed there for the count of 7 before she could go on. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of Genevieve Marley's life. She had, at 26, lived through a yellow fever outbreak in the lower deck of HMS Audacious, and through her father's last cancer, and through a school she had built herself out of a single Lent room in Plymouth and 43 orphans of the Channel Fleet. She had thought herself unsurprisable. The 6 weeks at Ravensmere taught her she was wrong. By day, she was a chambermaid. The promotion gave her access to the rooms that mattered, the Duke's small study, the small library next to it, the dressing room beyond the Duke's bedchamber, and, once Lady Helena's arrival was set, the suite of 3 rooms in the East Wing being made ready for her ladyship. She dusted, she turned mattresses, she changed water, she mended a tear in a brocade curtain that no one had asked her to mend, because Mrs. Wells was an excellent housekeeper, but she had not yet noticed the tear, and Genevieve had been raised by a naval surgeon who took a poor view of things going unfinished. By dusk, she was something else. At 7, after her supper in the kitchen with the upper servants, she went to the small study. She knocked twice. She let herself in. She locked the door behind her. The Duke was always there. So was Pell, half the time. Sometimes it was just the Duke and a map of the house spread on the table, and the brown glass bottle on the windowsill where the sun could not reach it. Sometimes it was the 3 of them and a list. Sometimes it was the Duke and Mr. Andrew Sayer. Mr. Sayer had been the 3rd surprise. He had arrived on the 18th of April, by post-chaise, in the dusk, with no portmanteau and no announcement, and had been let in through the tradesman's entrance and brought straight up the back stairs to the study. He was a small, sandy-haired, weather-beaten man of 40, with a slight Cornish burr and very clean hands, and he was, the Duke explained quietly to Genevieve as soon as she had locked the door, a Bow Street runner. Sayer had bowed. Genevieve had bowed. They had sat down, all 4 of them, around the Duke's table, in the lamplight, and they had begun to build the trap. Sayer's contribution was the apothecary at Bideford. His name is Mr. Holroyd, Your Grace. He has a respectable shop. He has, however, a less respectable correspondence with a Mr. Quayle of Mayfair, who is a chemist of no reputation whatever, and a gentleman in his own habits, whose habits are extensive. Quayle supplies, Holroyd compounds. His lordship picks up. The bottle that comes to your study is the 3rd hand it has passed through, which makes it difficult, Your Grace, but not impossible, to follow. We have not yet caught his lordship in the act of receiving it. Once we do, we have him. I propose, with your permission, Your Grace, to have a man at the Bideford shop on Tuesday next. You have my permission. And I propose, with your permission, Your Grace, to be in this house, quietly, on the night of the betrothal dinner. You will be. Disguised, Your Grace? As a footman. Yes, Your Grace. Halsey will see to it. Halsey is to be told nothing further. He knows about my legs. He knows nothing about Lord Tristan. Very good, Your Grace. Sayer. Your Grace. You will not, on the night, look at me. You will not look at Lord Tristan. You will look at the bottle. Wherever the bottle is, your eyes are. Whatever your eyes do not see, did not happen in a court of law. Are we agreed? Agreed, Your Grace. Then for heaven's sake, go and have something to eat. Pell, feed the man. Pell took Mr. Sayer down through the back passage to the still room, where Mrs. Wells had been told that there was a special audit of the cellar account being conducted by a discreet gentleman from London, and would she therefore feed him in the still room and ask no questions. Mrs. Wells, who had seen many odd gentlemen in 31 years and asked no questions about any of them, fed him. After that, every Tuesday and Thursday, in the duck-egg dusk of an English April becoming May, Mr. Andrew Sayer ate a remarkable quantity of cold beef and pickle in the still room, and was visible to the household staff as the auditor, and was, in fact, slowly building a paper trail from a curricle in a Bideford yard to a chemist's parlour in Mayfair to a scribbled recipe in a long-buried hand. Twice a week, also, Genevieve went to the Duke's study. She had not anticipated this part. She had thought, vaguely, that she would visit the study perhaps 3 times. She had not foreseen that she would be there for 2 hours every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday, and on the Sundays after church when the servants were at their afternoon tea, sitting across the table from the Duke, with a little list of things to tell him, and a little list of questions to ask him, and a strong tea between them, and no more spilled cups since the first one. He was, in private, an entirely different man from the one she had spent her first 6 weeks observing. The Duke, in his bath chair, was patient, kind, vaguely faded, a man who let other people speak first, who accepted small services without looking at the giver, who had perfected the slow blink of a man with limited reserves of attention. The Duke in the study was none of these things. He was quick. He was funny. A particular dry, soldier's funny that did not announce itself but landed, half a beat after he had said the thing, in the small movement of one corner of his mouth. He read everything. 3 newspapers, 2 parliamentary reports, every letter that came into the estate, the kitchen's account book, and he could quote any of them back at her on a Saturday, 3 days later. He knew the names of every tenant on his estate, and the names of all their children. He wrote, when he had to write, in a fast, clean hand, and he signed his name, when he signed it, with the small flourish he had been taught at Eton at 12 and had never quite outgrown. He listened to Genevieve. That was the disconcerting thing. She had been listened to in her life, by her father, by Captain Greville's letter, by occasional patients in her father's surgery. She had not been listened to like this. The Duke did not interrupt. He did not finish her sentences. He did not do the small, infuriating thing that intelligent men sometimes did, of nodding along faster than she was speaking, as if to show that he had reached her conclusion before she did. He waited. He let her finish. He thought about it. Then he asked the next question, and the question was always exactly the question that had been waiting beneath what she had just said, the question that had not yet been asked. She had not been prepared for it. She had been prepared for hostility, for charm, for distance, for the polite inattention of a duke to a chambermaid. She had not been prepared to be, for 2 hours twice a week, the most carefully attended to woman in a county. She found by the end of the 3rd week that she was looking forward to Tuesdays. This was a problem. She did not name it to herself because she was Surgeon Edward Marley's daughter, and her father had taught her at 11 what one names and what one does not. She did not name it. She simply went, on her free Saturday afternoon at the beginning of May, into the village and bought a length of plain, dark cotton, and made herself a new set of cap strings, and tied them in a slightly tighter, plainer way, so that her hair did not show even at the temples. And she took out the small silver locket her mother had left her, and put it at the back of her box. And she stopped, at supper in the kitchen, sitting in the chair she had been sitting in, and moved to the chair beside the cook's daughter, where she was slightly obscured from the door. These were small, practical adjustments. They were also, she knew, an admission. She made them anyway. Lady Helena Frayne arrived on the 25th of May, in 3 carriages, with her mother, 2 trunks, a French maid, a small brown spaniel called Apricot, and a great deal of silvery laughter that filled the South Drive for an hour after she had arrived. Genevieve, who had been preparing to dislike her on principle, had had to set the principle aside within 30 seconds. Lady Helena was 20 years old and almost embarrassingly lovely. The kind of fair, quick, wild rose-pink loveliness that does not last, but blazes for 5 years before it softens. And she was, Genevieve discovered to her dismay within the first day, also kind. Genuinely. Indiscriminately. With the sort of unself-conscious sweetness of disposition that does not survive the passage of 11 words across a dinner table without offering tea, asking after one's family, and making a small joke that included a servant in the laughter. She arrived with her mother, the Dowager Countess of Hartcombe, who was a small, sharp-eyed, wholly delightful woman of 52, who had been a friend of the late Duchess of Ravensmere, and who walked into the front hall of the house as if she had not, in fact, last walked into it 16 years ago. "My dear Edmund," said the Dowager Countess, taking off her gloves and handing them to Pell without looking at him. "Pell, you have not aged." "Madam," said Pell, "you are extremely kind." "I am extremely accurate, Pell." "Edmund, sit, my love, sit, do not get up. Helena, come here, do not hover. There, now. I have come to look at you, my dear, and to look at the house, and to make sure that my daughter is going to be happy, and I am going to do all three quite ruthlessly. Helena, my love, give the Duke your hand." Helena gave him her hand. The Duke, in his chair, kissed it. He had perfected by then a very small, very weary smile that did not quite reach the eyes. "Lady Helena." "Your Grace." "Welcome to Ravensmere." "Thank you, Your Grace. Apricot, Apricot, get down." "I am dreadfully sorry, Your Grace, she does this. Apricot!" The spaniel had her front paws on the Duke's knee and was licking his hand. The Duke laughed. It was, Genevieve, on the stair behind Mrs. Wells, noticed grimly, the realest laugh he had laughed in a fortnight. "She is quite charming," he said. "Do not punish her on my account." "You are very good. Mamma, isn't he... Mamma..." "Helena, my love, the Duke is indisposed." "Yes, of course. I beg your pardon, Your Grace. I am noisy." "You are welcome to be noisy in this house, Lady Helena. It is mostly very quiet." "Then I shall practice being noisy, and you shall tell me when to stop." "I shall not tell you to stop." You kissed her hand again. He was very kind to her. It was, Genevieve noticed, a particular kind of kindness. It was the kindness of a man who had genuinely intended, when he wrote his letter, to make this girl as happy as he could, and who had been spared from the obligation only by the intervention of a chambermaid and a Bow Street runner and a brown glass bottle. He had not, she noticed, told Lady Helena he loved her. He had not pretended. This was, she thought, a small mercy of his character. In the days that followed, the dressing-room fittings, the rehearsals of the wedding luncheon menu, the meetings with the Ravensmere chaplain, the long afternoon ride along the Dower House Drive that Helena took with her mother and came back from, glowing. Genevieve did her duty. She turned down Helena's bed. She brought up her morning chocolate. She arranged the wild flowers Helena picked herself in the garden into a Sèvres bowl beside her dressing table. And the next morning, Helena would have moved them to the windowsill because she liked them in the sun. She took Helena's letters down to the post bag. She did not, ever, look at Helena's face for longer than the count of 3. She was not, ever, asked to. Helena treated her with the warm, slightly distracted kindness of a girl who had been raised among devoted servants and had no reason to suspect that any of them might harbour, beneath their starched caps, any feelings other than the warm, slightly distracted gratitude she was familiar with. It was Helena's mother who looked at her. The Dowager Countess had been at Ravensmere 4 days when she found Genevieve in Helena's dressing room, alone, kneeling beside an open trunk and folding a velvet pelisse with the fluent care of a woman who had been folding things since she was 4. "You are not from this house," said the Dowager. Genevieve looked up. "Marley, ma'am. Promoted from the 3rd floor in April." "I see." The Dowager moved into the room. She closed the door behind her. You came up from where, child? Plymouth, Mom. From whom? My father's house, Mom. He was a naval surgeon. We lost him 9 years past. Marley. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. Edward Marley, of the Audacious. Yes, Mom. My husband, said the Dowager slowly, served on the Audacious as a midshipman in the year 4. He spoke of your father all his life. He said, she paused. He said he was the only naval surgeon he had met, whose handwriting his wife could read. My father practiced handwriting, Mom, deliberately. He thought it was a small kindness to his correspondence. The Dowager looked at her. She looked at her for a long time. Genevieve, kneeling, with the velvet pelisse half folded, looked back. Child, said the Dowager, very quietly, what are you doing in this house? Folding her ladyship's pelisse, Mom. That is not what I asked. There was a long silence. Ma'am, said Genevieve, choosing her words with great care. I have been asked, by a friend of my late father's, to be, at this house, for a few weeks, what I have always been, which is a careful person. I have promised to be no more and no less. I shall return to Plymouth in June. The Dowager was silent. My daughter, she said at last, will be cared for, Ma'am, in this house, as long as I am in it. As long as you are in it. Yes, Ma'am. You will not be in it long, you say? No, Ma'am. Marley, said the Dowager softly, look at me. Genevieve looked up. The Dowager's eyes were grey and very intelligent. She had, Genevieve noticed for the first time, the same grey as the Duke. Welsh grey. The mothers of half the great houses in England had been Welsh in the last century, and it had bred a particular kind of sharp-eyed woman. My late husband, said the Dowager, left me with a great many pieces of advice for life, of which I have used most. He told me, among other things, but when one finds an unexpected ally in an unexpected uniform, one does not ask what they are doing. One asks what one can do for them. Marley, what can I do for you? Genevieve closed her eyes for a moment. She had not, in the past 6 weeks, expected this. She had not allowed herself to want it. The kindness of the Dowager Countess, which was different in kind from the Duke's careful attention and from Helena's distracted sweetness. This kindness was the kindness of a clever older woman seeing another clever younger woman in danger and offering, without ceremony, a hand. This kindness almost broke her. She set the pelisse down. Ma'am? Yes, my dear. On the night of the betrothal dinner, the 28th, you may be asked, I think, to step into a room where you do not expect to be needed. I cannot tell you which room. I can only ask that you trust the person who asks you, and that you take her ladyship with you. The Dowager regarded her for a long moment. That night, child. That night, Mom. I see. A pause. I shall not ask, but I expect, after, an explanation. From the Duke, if not from you. You shall have it, Mom. The Dowager nodded, once, briskly. She turned to the door. With her hand on the latch, she paused. Marley, Mom, my husband would have liked you very much. She went out. Genevieve put the pelisse down. She covered her face for the count of 5. Then she rose, finished the trunk, took the empty glass and the towel from beside Helena's basin, and went down the back stair to the linen room, as if nothing whatever had happened. There was a great deal to do still, and she had 2 days. Lord Tristan Halworth arrived at Ravensmere Court on the morning of the 28th of May, an hour before the betrothal dinner, alone, on horseback. He arrived early because, Pell informed Genevieve in the still room, with the air of a man delivering very interesting news. He had asked at the door for a moment privately with the Duke before the other guests arrived. Pell had shown him into the small library. He had been there for 20 minutes. He had emerged, smiling. He had then, in passing, requested a moment with Mr. Halsey, the footman, in the south corridor, a private moment, which Pell, who had been listening with unusual care from the pantry door, had timed at exactly 4 minutes. Halsey, Mr. Pell. Halsey, Miss Marley. Halsey was, at that moment, sitting on a chair in the still room with his head in his hands. He had come to them, Pell at his side, half an hour after the conversation in the south corridor. He had sat down in the chair he was now in. He had not looked up. He had said, in a small, terrified voice, "Mr. Pell, I am to put a powder in His Grace's wine tonight. His Lordship asked me half an hour ago. He gave me the powder. He gave me 10 guineas. He said His Grace was failing, and that the kindest thing was a sudden, quiet end before the wedding, so the lady should not be widowed in her marriage gown. He said I should not weep, because no one would know, and that he himself would arrange a place for me in Ireland after, and that he had always thought well of me. Mr. Pell. Mr. Pell, I am not going to do it." "I know, lad." "He did not even look at me, Mr. Pell. He looked at the floor while he gave it me, like I was a dog." "I know." "Mr. Pell, what do I do?" Pell had taken Halsey by the shoulder. "You give the powder to Miss Marley. You let Miss Marley look at it. And then, lad, you do exactly what His Grace tells you to do, and you do it well. Because if you do it well, His Lordship hangs by his own hand, and you keep your place, and you become first footman on Sunday, and all of this becomes a story you tell your grandchildren by a fire." Halsey had given Genevieve the powder. She had taken it to the linen room. She had tested it in 5 minutes, with a single drop of water, a single drop of acid, and the spirit lamp. She had come back. She had said, very quietly, "Aconite, the full strength, enough for a horse. He intends his cousin to die at the table." Pell had gone white, in a way Genevieve had not seen a Pell go white in 6 weeks. He had said, after a moment, "His Grace must be told. Now." She had gone herself, with the small folded paper of powder in her hand, up the back stair, along the gallery, to the small study door. She had not knocked. She had let herself in. The Duke was at the desk, his back to the room, looking out of the window at the south drive, where Lord Tristan's horse was being walked by a groom. He turned at the sound of the door. "Your cousin," said Genevieve, "has given Halsey a paper of aconite to put in your wine tonight. The dose is for a horse. He has paid Halsey 10 guineas and the offer of a place in Ireland." The Duke looked at her. He looked at her for the count of 3. Then he held out his hand. She put the paper in it. He looked at the paper. He did not tremble. "He cannot wait." "He cannot wait, Your Grace." "He cannot wait until the wedding." "He cannot wait until tonight is over, Your Grace. He intends you to die before the cake is cut." The Duke set the paper on the desk. "He has miscalculated," he said quietly, "in 3 places. He has miscalculated in believing Halsey is corruptible. He has miscalculated in believing I will be watching him at table. He has miscalculated in believing his apothecary has not been turned." A pause. "And he has miscalculated, although he does not yet know it, in one other thing." "What thing, Your Grace?" "He has miscalculated in believing that the only woman in this house with eyes is the woman in the dining room." He looked at her. "Miss Marley." "Your Grace?" "After tonight, you will not be a chambermaid in this house." "After tonight, Your Grace. We shall see." "You will not. I forbid it. After tonight, you will be what you are, whatever you ask to be, in this house or out of it, with my full purse at your back. Are we agreed?" "Your Grace, may we speak of it after tonight?" "Yes, He folded the paper. He set it inside the inner pocket of his coat. Yes, tonight first. Will you go and find Mr. Sayer and tell him about the powder? And will you, in 20 minutes, come down the south stair and into the small library and stand behind the curtain? The third curtain from the door. There is a hassock there. Halsey knows. Halsey will be at the buffet. Pell will be at the door. Lord Tristan will be at the table. Sayer will be... You will see where Sayer will be. You will hear everything. You will not speak. You will be, in this house, what you have been for nearly 2 months. A careful, listening woman who is not in the room until the room needs her. Is that understood? Yes, Your Grace. Good. Then go. She went. The betrothal dinner of the Duke of Ravensmere and Lady Helena Frayne on the evening of the 28th of May, 1816, was attended by 12 people and witnessed, in part, by a 13th, who was concealed behind a brocade curtain at the far end of the small library, and who could see, through a small parting in the velvet, the entire length of the dining table. The dining room of Ravensmere had been, until that night, a melancholy place. Its long mahogany table reduced to 1/3 of its leaves for 14 months, its candelabra lit only on Christmas. That night the leaves were in. The table was set for 12. 2 long branches of candles burned at either end. The plate had been brought up from the strong room for the first time since the late Duchess's funeral, and the silver soup tureens reflected the firelight in long, oily gleams. Spring flowers, apple blossom, white lilac, deep blue iris, stood in 2 low Sèvres bowls at the centre. The Duke was wheeled in by Pell at 5 minutes past 7. The chair was placed at the head of the table. The footman behind it was Halsey, who looked, to anyone glancing at him, exactly as he always looked. A tall, neat, sandy-haired Devon boy of 22, who had been in service since 15, and could be trusted, as everyone in the house knew, to fill a wine-glass and not say a word out of turn. The footman behind the Duke's right hand was a new man. He was small, weather-beaten, sandy-haired, with very clean hands. He was introduced by Pell, to anyone who asked, as Mr. Carter, on loan from the Dowager Countess's establishment for the evening. No one, of course, asked. Lord Tristan Halworth sat on the Duke's right. This had been arranged by Lord Tristan, who had, with the most charming concern, suggested to Mrs. Wells that he be placed there because his cousin tired easily and might wish to converse without raising his voice. Mrs. Wells, who had been told by the Duke that morning that whatever Lord Tristan suggested was to be agreed to, had inclined her head and said it was a kind thought. Lady Helena sat on the Duke's left, in a gown the colour of pale primroses, with her mother beside her. Genevieve, behind the curtain in the small library, which adjoined the dining room by a connecting door, currently held closed only by the thinness of an old oak frame and the worn brass latch, saw all of this through a half-inch parting in the velvet. The library candles had been put out. She stood very still. She had a small, folded square of paper in her sleeve, her own, the second copy of the aconite test from Biddeford, in case any officer of the law that night required immediate confirmation. She had her father's old folding lancet, also in her sleeve, in case any officer of the law that night required something else. Soup was served. Fish was served. The Duke ate the soup, said little, smiled tiredly, and drank, to the great satisfaction of his cousin, watching him over the rim of a glass, about half of his small white wine. Between the fish and the meat, Halsey moved to the buffet, opened the second decanter, a fine red claret, which had been brought up that morning by the cellar boy under Pell's eye, and from which not one cork in the entire bottle had been touched by any other hand, and began, in the calm, slightly bored manner of an English footman performing a task he had performed 3,000 times, to pour. He filled the glass at the Duke's right elbow first, as etiquette required, because Lord Tristan was the senior gentleman after the host. He stepped behind the Duke. He paused for half a second over the Duke's glass, with the decanter very slightly tipped, and at that precise moment the second footman, the small weather-beaten man with the very clean hands, stepped past him to retrieve a fallen napkin from beside Lord Tristan's chair. The two footmen brushed shoulders. The decanter, in Halsey's hand, jolted. A small fold of white powder, which had been, for the past 14 seconds, palmed in Halsey's right hand, disappeared into the open inner pocket of the second footman's coat. Halsey continued to pour. He filled the Duke's glass with claret. He stepped back. No one at the table had looked up. The Dowager Countess had been making a small, dry observation about the Bishop of Winchester to her host. Helena had been laughing. Lord Tristan had been laughing too, and watching his cousin, and waiting. Mr. Sayer, Mr. Carter, footman, did not look at Halsey. He did not look at the Duke. He did not look at Lord Tristan. He looked at the paper in his pocket. The meat was served. The Duke lifted his glass. He looked across the rim at his cousin. "Tristan. Edmund. Will you join me to my Helena?" "To Helena, Edmund. With all my heart." The Duke drank. He drank the whole glass, slowly, with apparent enjoyment. He set it down empty. Lord Tristan watched him. He did not show what he was feeling. His mouth moved, briefly, into the very specific smile he had brought with him at 3 in the afternoon. The smile of a man hearing, at last, a piece of news he had been waiting half a year for. He raised his own glass. "To my dear cousin," he said, "and to his bride." He drank. Halsey, behind him, refilled his glass. The dinner proceeded. It proceeded through the meat and the savoury and the dessert and the cheese and the speeches. Lord Tristan ate well. He spoke charmingly. He toasted his cousin again at the cheese and again at the cordials, and his cousin returned the toast each time, looking, as the meal went on, slightly more tired, slightly more grey, slightly more. Lord Tristan's blue eyes did not show it, but they were watching very carefully. Slightly more like a man whose heart was beginning to fail. By the time the ladies rose, the Duke's hand on his glass was almost imperceptibly tremulous. By the time the gentleman rose for port, he had had to be helped, gently, by Pell back into his chair, and his colour was a remarkable, unhealthy white. By the time Pell suggested, very softly, that His Grace might wish to retire, that the excitement of the evening had been, perhaps, too much for him, Lord Tristan was already reaching, with all the warmth of a beloved relative, to grip his cousin's wrist in farewell. His cousin's wrist, when he took it, was cold. His cousin's pulse, beneath his thumb, was thready and slow. Lord Tristan let his cousin's wrist fall. He stood. He bowed to the Dowager Countess. He kissed Helena's hand. He watched Pell wheel his cousin out of the dining room, and he did not, even for a moment, follow with his eyes. He was the very picture of a man whose cousin would not, after all, see the morning. He was also, although he did not yet know it, a man who in the next 90 seconds would meet, in the south corridor on his way to the gentleman's withdrawing room, the second footman. The second footman, a small weather-beaten man with very clean hands, had Lord Tristan's empty wine-glass in one hand. He had also, in the inside pocket of his coat, a folded square of white paper containing a quantity of aconite sufficient to fell a horse, with one side of the paper marked, in faint pencil, T.H., 28th of May, dining room sideboard, recovered by Sayer. He had, in his other inside pocket, a warrant. In the south corridor he stopped. Lord Tristan, who had been about to pass, stopped also in mild surprise. "Yes, fellow?" "Lord Tristan Helworth," said Mr. Sayer, in his small, clean Cornish voice. "I am a principal officer of the Bow Street Magistrates. I arrest you, my lord, on the charge of the attempted slow injury of the Duke of Ravensmere. The other charges I shall read upstairs, in the small library, at His Grace's pleasure. Will you come with me quietly, my lord, or do you require assistance?" Lord Tristan's blue eyes went, for the first and only time, perfectly still. Then he laughed. It was a short, bright laugh, exactly the laugh he had given on the terrace at his sister's wedding 11 months ago, and it had not changed. He had, Genevieve reflected later, an excellent laugh. It was almost his only redeeming feature. "My dear sir," he said, "Edmund is sinking under a long illness. I've just kissed him goodbye. Have you been drinking?" "His Grace, my lord, is in the small library, with his bride and her mother and his man. Will you come?" Lord Tristan looked at him. Behind Mr. Sayre, in the doorway of the south corridor, Mr. Halsey had appeared. Behind Mr. Halsey, the second footman from the village, in fact, the third Bow Street officer, had appeared. They were both very quiet, and they were both very large. Lord Tristan's face did not change. He went with them. In the small library, the candles had been relit. The Duke sat in a chair by the fire. He was, Genevieve noted as she stepped out from behind the brocade curtain, no longer pale. The half-glass of claret he had taken at dinner had been, by careful arrangement with Pell, mostly water, with a small, theatrical addition of port to the colour. His hand had trembled only because he had chosen to make it tremble. His skin had gone grey because he had spent 9 weeks practicing it. His pulse, when Lord Tristan had taken it, had been thready and slow, because the Duke had, with the instinct of a soldier and the willpower of a man who had spent 14 months being underestimated, sat very still in his chair for the count of 2 minutes, and slowed his own breathing to the rate of a man asleep. He was now perfectly upright. He was sitting forward in the chair, not back. His legs were crossed at the ankle. He had a glass of perfectly genuine claret in his hand, untouched. Beside him stood Pell, with the small folded paper of aconite from Halsey's coat pocket. The white paper Halsey had been given that afternoon. The white paper which had not, in fact, ever entered the Duke's wine, open in his hand. On the small table between them lay 3 more papers. The first was the recipe Lord Tristan had brought from London the previous autumn, written in the hand of Mr. Quayle of Mayfair, which Mr. Sayre's man at Bideford had retrieved from Mr. Holroyd's strongbox the previous Tuesday with the help of a magistrate's warrant. The second was a letter from Mr. Quayle of Mayfair to Lord Tristan Halworth, dated the 7th of February, which had been intercepted by Mr. Sayre's correspondent at the post house at Bristol 6 weeks ago. The third was a sworn affidavit of Mr. Halsey, taken that afternoon at 6 o'clock by Mr. Sayre in the still room of Ravensmere Court, regarding 10 guineas, a powder, and a place in Ireland. Lord Tristan was brought into the room. He looked at the table. He looked at his cousin. His cousin looked back at him, very quietly. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Lord Tristan said, in a small, even voice, almost without bitterness, almost only with surprise, "You were not sinking." "I was not." "You walked." "I have walked since January, Tristan." "Since January. Since January." A pause. "Edmund," said Lord Tristan, "I do not. Edmund, I am very sorry. I shall not pretend. You are quite right. I shall not pretend." "Thank you." "Edmund, may I sit?" "You may sit." Lord Tristan sat. He sat in the chair opposite his cousin, with the small table between them, with the papers facing him. He looked at them. He looked at his hands. He looked at his cousin. "It was the title," he said. "I know. It was always the title. You know what my father was like with me. He used to say I had been born a Halworth by accident, and he was sorry for it. He used to say it at dinner, in front of guests. I know, Tristan. You know. I know everything Uncle Stephen ever said to you. We grew up in the same house. I was sorry for you. I'm still sorry for you. That does not change what is in those papers." "No." A pause. "No, it does not." There was a silence. The fire cracked in the grate. "What happens now?" "Now," said the Duke, "Mr. Sayre will take you to the gatehouse. There is a magistrate waiting there, and a constable. From the gatehouse, you go to the assize court at Exeter. From Exeter, depending on the assize, you may be removed to London. The case is already prepared. You will not be hanged." "I would prefer to be hanged." "I'm sure you would, Tristan. You will not be." "Why?" "Because you are a Halworth, and because the Dowager Countess of Hartcombe has been kind enough to allow my engagement to her daughter to be quietly dissolved by mutual consent at midnight tonight. And because this house has had, in 14 months, all the public scandal it can presently bear. You will be sent to a private retreat house at Berkhamsted, under the care of a Dr. Walpole, who is an excellent man. You will be there for the remainder of your life. You will see no one. You will write to no one. You will not, before you ask, be permitted to write to me. The estate will continue to support you. You will be comfortable. You will be alive. You will not, however, be in the world." Lord Tristan looked at his hands. "That is generous," he said. "It is what our grandfather would have done." "Yes, he was generous." "Tristan?" "Yes." "Goodbye." Lord Tristan rose. He bowed. He had perfect manners, even now. He turned, without looking at the Duke again, and walked between Mr. Sayre and Mr. Halsey, out of the small library, and down the south corridor, and out of the front door, and out of Ravensmere Court forever. The Dowager Countess of Hartcombe, who had been sitting in the corner of the room with her daughter's hand in hers, watched him go. When the front door closed, she stood up. She crossed to the Duke. She kissed him once on the forehead, as if she had been his aunt, and she was, in a manner of speaking, by an old promise to his mother in 1810. Then she turned to Helena, who had been crying very quietly for the past quarter of an hour. "Helena, my love." "Mamma." "Come, we are going to bed. The Duke has a great deal to do tonight, and we have a great deal to do tomorrow morning, which is to draft a letter to the Gazette withdrawing this absurd engagement before any newspaper hears of it. Come." "Mamma, You did not love him, my love." "I did not, Mamma." "And he did not love you." "He did not, Mamma." "And we shall therefore go to bed quite cheerfully and entirely uninjured. Come, Apricot. Apricot, where are you? Apricot, leave the Duke's boots." The Dowager swept her daughter, the spaniel, and a small cloud of relief out of the room. The door closed behind them. The Duke and Genevieve were alone. He looked at her across the small library. The candles had burned down a little. The fire was low. The papers on the table were just the papers. Pell had gone, with his usual silent tact, somewhere else. The Duke set his glass down. "Genevieve." "Your Grace." "It is no longer your Grace. Not in this room. Not at the end of tonight." "Edmund." "Genevieve, sit, please." She sat in the chair Lord Tristan had vacated, on the other side of the small table. He looked at her for a moment. You have done a great deal for me." "I was sent for it, Edmund." "Yes." "I would have done it for nothing." "Yes." A pause. "Genevieve." "Yes." 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, when I asked you in this house to give me advice on whom I should marry to bait my cousin." "Yes." "I asked the wrong woman the wrong question." "Edmund." "Hear me out. I have practiced this for 2 days, and if I do not say it tonight, I shall not get it said. You said I should marry anyone. I should have said, I would marry one woman. I would marry one woman who has lived in my house for 2 months, who has spilled tea on me precisely once and at no other time, who has watched me walk in the dark and not betrayed me, who has tasted my poison and laughed, and who has let me, without any indication at all, hope once, in the small library in candlelight, that the most extraordinary woman of my life might be willing, when this was over, to consider marrying me. Genevieve. She did not move. "That is not a question," she said. "Will you marry me, Genevieve?" "For the trap?" "No, the trap is sprung. The trap is over. Lord Tristan is in the gatehouse. I am asking, Genevieve, what I would have asked you on the 2nd of February, had I known you on the 2nd of February. I would have asked you on the 2nd of February and on every subsequent morning, and on the morning of the 8th of June if the world had let me get there. I am asking you tonight because tonight is the first moment in 15 months when I am free to ask. Genevieve, will you marry me?" She looked at him. She had not, she realized, allowed herself to consider the question. She had folded her cap strings tighter. She had put her locket at the back of the box. She had taken the chair beside the cook's daughter at supper. She had, with the practical, deliberate care of a woman who had been raised by a sensible man, made every adjustment necessary to ensure that this question, when it came, and she had known, somewhere beneath the cap strings and the locket and the cook's daughter, that it would come, would find her composed. It found her composed. It also found her crying. "Edmund." "Yes." "My father said." "Yes." "My father said one might love a patient. One must not like one. Liking was what made the hand slow." "Yes." You have been a patient." "I have." "I have liked you, Edmund. I have liked you very much." "I have noticed." "I have liked you so much that I bought a length of dark cotton in the village 3 weeks ago, and made tighter cap strings, and put my mother's locket at the back of my box. I did this because I knew that if I did not, I should not be able to keep my hand steady when I tested the next bottle." "Yes." "Your hand is now perfectly steady." "Yes." "Mine is not." He came around the small table. He knelt beside her chair, slowly, deliberately, like a man who had spent 14 months learning to move with care, who had no intention now of moving without care for the rest of his life. He took her hands in his. His hands, she noted, with the small, irrelevant precision of a surgeon's daughter, were very warm. "Genevieve." "Edmund." "Will you marry me?" "Yes." "Yes." "Yes, Edmund." He kissed her, once, carefully, the way a man kisses a woman whose hands, beneath his, are at last allowed to shake. They were married, very quietly, on the 3rd of August, at the small chapel of Wexham St. Mary's, by the same Ravensmere chaplain who had been preparing the pulpit 9 weeks earlier for an entirely different ceremony. The Dowager Countess of Hartcombe stood for the bride, her daughter Lady Helena being, by then, away on a visit to a young Mr. Audley of Devonshire, whom she had met at the betrothal dinner, and who had, with a clean, decisive lack of duplicity, asked her to dance 4 times, and called the next morning. She had, by Christmas, accepted his suit. She is now, at the date of this writing, the very happy mother of 3 apple-cheeked Audley children, and the keeper of an extremely badly behaved spaniel called Apricot the Younger. Captain Sir Hugh Greville, of Salisbury, attended the wedding in his old regimental coat. He had brought, from his own garden, a single bunch of white lilac for the bride. He gave it to her at the church door, and he could not, without embarrassing himself, look at her for very long. Mr. Pell, the valet, attended also, in his Sunday black. He stood beside the Duke at the altar in lieu of a brother. He did not weep. He had decided not to weep, and Pell, when he had decided a thing, did not deviate. Mr. Halsey, the first footman, attended. He had, since the night of the 28th of May, been promoted twice, and had been given, by the Duke's own hand, a small silver watch with the inscription, "For a quiet hand, in great cause," on its inner case, which he wore on every Sunday of his life. Mr. Andrew Sayer of Bow Street did not attend, being then in London on quite another case, but he sent a letter and a small wedding present in the form of a folded square of paper. The paper had, in pencil, the words, T.H., 28th of May, dining room sideboard, recovered by Sayer. And it had been, at one time, Lord Tristan Halworth's principal evidence against himself. The Duke kept it in the drawer of his small study, beside his marriage lines. In the spring of 1817, 10 months after the wedding, on a morning in late April, the new Duchess of Ravensmere rose at 6:30. The sun was already on the south casement of the breakfast room. The daffodils were nodding in the porcelain bowl on the sideboard. The long case clock ticked exactly as it had ticked the year before. A drift of cherry blossom petal blew past the leaded pane and lodged in the corner of the glass. She came down in a morning gown, the precise dark blue of the iris she had carried at her wedding. The Duke, who had come down before her, was already at the breakfast table. He rose when she came in. He still rose every morning when she came in. He was not, as it happened, very tall, but he was, that morning, 6 feet 2 3/4 of the steadiest man in the county. She came round to his chair. She set her hand on his shoulder. Edmund. Genevieve. Tea? Please. She poured. Her hand was steady. She did not, thank God, spill a drop. She set the teapot down. She looked at him. It is a very good kettle, she said gravely. It is a very ordinary kettle. I have, she said, had it newly hinged. He looked up. His mouth moved at the corner. Have you, my love? Quite recently. I am relieved. I thought you might be. He took her hand. He raised it to his mouth. He kissed the inside of her wrist, slowly, without performance, in the morning sun. Outside, a thrush sang. In the corridor beyond the open door, both doors were open that morning, and would, by the small new daily order of the house, never again be locked at this hour. Pell could be heard scolding the under-footman about a tray of toast. The Duchess of Ravensmere drank her tea. Pull your chair closer to the fire. If you have ever spilled something at exactly the wrong moment and discovered, in the chaos that followed, that it was in fact exactly the right moment, but the small, clumsy accident your hands had made in the dark was in fact the door through which an entire life could come into a room, then you will know what kind of morning that was. There are, in this old country of ours, a great many quiet houses where the truth sits patiently for a very long time, waiting for someone careful enough to spill the tea. If you would like another such story, you know where to find me. The fire keeps very well in this hearth. There is always a kettle. There is always tea. There is always, with a little patience, another man in another study who is not, after all, what he has allowed himself to seem. Stay a moment longer, if you can. There is more.